This family called the Black Lady a gold digger. They did not know she is their billionaire sponsor. She's only with you for the money, David. Can't you see that? His sister's words cut like glass across the dinner table. What they didn't know. The woman they called a gold digger had been secretly saving their family from bankruptcy for years. And she was about to disappear forever. If you're ready to enjoy the story and want to see how this explosive confrontation changes everything, hit that subscribe button right now. Because what happens next will completely flip everything you think you know about love, family, and the price of generosity. Trust me, you don't want to miss the moment when David finally finds his voice and shocks everyone, including Selina herself. Subscribe and let's dive into this incredible story together. The city breathed around her like a living thing, exhaust fumes mixing with the scent of street vendors' coffee, honking horns creating a symphony of urban chaos, and thousands of footsteps drumming against concrete in an endless rhythm. Yet in the midst of this perpetual motion, Selina Ward stood perfectly still. Her reflection stared back at her from the glass facade of the towering building that bore her name in gleaming silver letters, Ward Investments. 23 floors of steel and ambition reaching toward the gray December sky, each window reflecting the success story the world believed they knew. The woman in the glass wore a tailored charcoal coat that cost more than most people's monthly salary, her dark hair pulled back in a style that spoke of boardrooms and billion-dollar decisions. But her eyes, those warm brown eyes that had seen too much, told a different story entirely. The irony wasn't lost on her. Here she stood, outside the empire she'd built with her own hands, feeling more invisible than she had in years. The weight of the morning's events pressed against her chest like a physical thing, making each breath deliberate, measured. She's only with you for the money, David. Can't you see that? The words echoed in her mind, spoken just hours earlier by his sister Margaret during what was supposed to be a casual family brunch. The venom in Margaret's voice had been carefully disguised as concern, wrapped in the kind of polite cruelty that wealthy families had perfected over generations. Selina's fingers found the small velvet box in her coat pocket, the engagement ring David had given her just 3 weeks ago. The diamond caught the light from the street lamps beginning to flicker on in the early winter dusk, creating tiny rainbows that danced across her palm. Such a beautiful symbol of love, now feeling heavy with the weight of judgment and suspicion. A homeless man shuffled past, his cardboard sign reading, "Anything helps, God bless." Without thinking, Selina reached into her purse and handed him a $50 bill. He looked up at her with surprise and genuine gratitude, his weathered face breaking into a smile that held more warmth than she'd felt all day from David's family. "Thank you, miss. You've got a kind heart. A kind heart." If only David's family could see past the color of her skin and the size of her bank account to find that heart. If only they knew the truth about who had really been helping their family all these years, anonymously paying off debts, quietly ensuring their businesses stayed afloat, protecting their family name from the financial ruin that would have consumed them without her intervention. The irony was so bitter it almost made her laugh. The woman they accused of being a gold digger had been their silent savior, their guardian angel working behind the scenes while they built their walls of prejudice higher and higher. Her phone buzzed with a text from David. "Where are you? My family is asking about you." Of course they were, probably wondering if she'd finally shown her true colors and run off with some imaginary fortune. The thought made her jaw tighten with familiar frustration. Another message followed immediately. "I'm sorry about today. I should have said something. Can we talk?" Selina stared at the messages, her thumb hovering over the keyboard. David was a good man, gentle where she was guarded, patient where she was fierce. He loved her, she was certain of that. But love, she was learning, didn't shield you from the prejudices of others. And sometimes, the people you loved most could hurt you the deepest through their silence. The city continued to pulse around her as she stood there, suspended between two worlds, the one where she was Selina Ward, the untouchable billionaire, and the one where she was just a woman trying to find her place in a family that refused to see her worth. As the first snowflakes began to fall, catching in her hair and melting against her cheeks, Selina made a decision. She wouldn't run. She wouldn't hide. But she also wouldn't continue to accept their judgment in silence. Tomorrow would bring changes. Changes that would shake the very foundation of everything David's family believed they knew about her. But tonight, she would allow herself this moment of vulnerability, this pause before the storm. What would you do if the people you wanted to love you most seemed determined to judge you for all the wrong reasons? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The penthouse apartment that Selina called home sat 43 floors above the city's chaos, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view that real estate agents called breathtaking, and she simply called quiet. Tonight, as she stepped through the mahogany doors, the silence felt heavier than usual. The space reflected her journey, not the sterile showcase of wealth that magazines might expect, but a carefully curated blend of comfort and aspiration. Her mother's worn leather Bible sat on the marble coffee table next to first-edition business books. Framed photos told the story of her rise, receiving her MBA, shaking hands with world leaders, but most precious of all, the faded Polaroid of her and her mother on graduation day, both of them crying and laughing at the same time. Selina kicked off her designer heels and padded barefoot across the hardwood floors to the kitchen, where she poured herself a glass of wine. Not the expensive vintage from her collection, but a simple bottle her mother used to buy for special occasions. Some habits, some memories, were too precious to abandon for the sake of sophistication. Her phone rang, David's name lighting up the screen along with his photo, that genuine smile that had first caught her attention 2 years ago at a charity gala. He'd been the only person there who'd asked about her work without immediately following up with questions about her net worth. "Hey," she answered, settling onto her couch. "Hey yourself." His voice carried that gentle warmth that had become her anchor. "Are you okay? You disappeared after brunch, and I know my family was difficult today." Difficult. Such a carefully chosen word. David had mastered the art of diplomatic language in his years as a non-profit director, but sometimes Selina wished he'd just call Prejudice by its name. "I'm fine," she lied, then immediately corrected herself. "Actually, no. I'm not fine, David. Your sister basically accused me of being a gold digger in front of your entire family, and you said nothing." The silence stretched between them, filled with all the words he should have spoken earlier. "I know," he finally said, his voice heavy with regret. "I should have defended you immediately. I was caught off guard by how harsh Margaret was being." Caught off guard. Selina's grip tightened on her wine glass. "David, this isn't the first time. Your family has been making these comments for months. The snide remarks about my expensive tastes, the questions about whether I really understand what it means to be in a relationship with someone from their background. As if my background is something to be ashamed of." She could picture him now, running his hand through his dark hair the way he did when he was wrestling with difficult conversations. David Hale, 6 feet of gentle strength, with eyes the color of summer storms and hands that had never known the calluses hers once carried from scrubbing kitchen floors. "Tell me about your mother again," he said softly, changing the subject in that way he had when conversations got too heavy. It was both endearing and frustrating, his instinct to comfort rather than confront. Despite her anger, Selina felt her shoulders relax slightly. He always asked about her mother when he sensed she needed grounding. "She would have liked you," Selina said, her voice growing softer. "Mama had this way of seeing people's hearts before anything else. She worked double shifts at 3 different restaurants just to keep food on our table and me in school. Never complained, not once. She used to say, 'Baby girl, your worth isn't in what the world gives you or takes away. It's in what you know about yourself in the quiet moments.'" She sounds incredible. She was. Selina's eyes drifted to the framed photo on her mantel, her mother in her waitress uniform, tired but smiling, arm around teenage Selina in her school clothes. "She died believing I could change the world. Some days I wonder if I'm honoring that belief or just proving everyone right about what happens when people like us reach too high." "Hey!" David's voice carried a firmness she rarely heard from him. "Don't let my family's ignorance make you question your worth. What you've accomplished is extraordinary." But that was just it. He saw her accomplishments, her success, her strength. What he didn't always see was how much his family's rejection cut into the girl who still remembered the sting of other people's judgment, who had built walls around her heart that even love struggled to breach. "I need you to understand something," Selina said, setting down her wine glass and choosing her words carefully. "I've spent my entire life fighting to be seen as more than my circumstances. And your family, they look at me and see exactly what I've always feared people would see. Not my mind, not my heart, not the work I've done to get here. Just assumptions. I know. Do you, though? The question hung in the air between them. Because when Margaret made those comments today, when your uncle suggested I must be high maintenance, when your mother asked if I was sure I understood what marriage really meant, you stayed silent. And your silence, David, it felt like agreement. The truth of it settled around them like snow, cold and undeniable. I love you, he said finally. More than I've ever loved anyone. But you're right. I haven't been the partner you deserve when it comes to my family. I keep thinking if I give them time, they'll see what I see. And what if they don't? The question that had been haunting her for months finally found voice. What if love wasn't enough? What if the fairy tale she'd allowed herself to believe in was just another beautiful lie? As they talked into the night, Selina found herself thinking about the box of her mother's letters hidden in her bedroom closet. Words of wisdom and strength she hadn't revisited in years. Maybe it was time to remember who she was before she became who the world expected her to be. Have you ever felt caught between who you really are and who others expect you to be? How do you stay true to yourself when facing judgment? Let us know your thoughts below. 3 days after their phone conversation, Selina stood in the marble lobby of the Hale family's law firm. Her reflection multiplied in the polished surfaces around her. She'd come here with a purpose, not to confront, but to understand. If she was going to marry into this family, she needed to know exactly what she was walking into. The receptionist, a young woman with kind eyes, looked up as Selina approached. Ms. Ward? Mr. David is in court this morning, but he should be back around. Actually, I'm here to see Margaret Hale, Selina said, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. I don't have an appointment, but I was hoping she might have a few minutes. 20 minutes later, Selina sat across from David's sister in an office that screamed old money. Leather-bound books, oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors, and furniture that had probably been passed down through generations. Margaret Hale looked exactly like what central casting would order for established wealth. Blonde hair pulled back in a perfect chignon, pearl earrings, and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. This is unexpected, Margaret said, settling behind her mahogany desk like a queen on her throne. I have to admit, I'm curious why you wanted to see me. Selina had rehearsed this conversation in her mind a dozen times, but now, sitting here, she decided to abandon her careful script. I wanted to understand why you hate me. Margaret's eyebrows rose slightly, the first genuine expression Selina had seen from her. Hate is a strong word. Then what would you call it? The constant comments about my motives, the questions about whether I understand your family's values, the suggestion that I'm somehow taking advantage of David. For a moment, Margaret said nothing, her fingers drumming against the desk. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a weariness that surprised Selina. My brother has always been idealistic. He sees the best in everyone, sometimes to his own detriment. When he was in college, he dated a girl who seemed wonderful, charming, intelligent, claimed to love him deeply. It wasn't until after she'd borrowed money from him, used his connections to advance her career, and then left him for someone more suitable that we realized what she really wanted. Selina felt something cold settle in her chest. And you think I'm her? I think you're incredibly successful and completely capable of taking care of yourself financially. Which makes me wonder why you're with my brother, who works for a non-profit and will never be able to match your lifestyle. The assumption hung in the air between them like a challenge. Selina could have explained about David's kindness, his integrity, the way he made her laugh even on her worst days. Instead, she found herself asking a different question. What do you know about your family's financial situation over the past 5 years? Margaret's confident expression flickered for just a moment. What do you mean? Your father's construction company. It was facing bankruptcy in 2019, wasn't it? And your uncle's restaurant chain, there were some serious tax issues that could have cost him everything. The color drained from Margaret's face. How do you? Your brother's nonprofit was about to lose its major funding source 2 years ago. Without that grant renewal, he would have had to lay off half his staff. Stop. Margaret's voice was barely a whisper now. But Selina couldn't stop. The truth had been locked inside her for too long, growing heavier with each accusation, each dismissive comment. There was an anonymous benefactor who stepped in each time. Someone who believed in your family's work, who thought they deserved a second chance. Someone who never wanted credit, never wanted recognition, just wanted to help. Margaret's hands trembled as she reached for her water glass. "You're saying that was your gold digger?" Selina's voice held no satisfaction, only exhaustion. "The woman you've spent months trying to convince your brother he shouldn't marry has been supporting your family for years." The silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of revelation and the crumbling of assumptions. Margaret's face cycled through emotions: shock, disbelief, shame, and finally, something that might have been understanding. "Why?" Margaret's voice cracked on the single word. "Because I love him. Because his work matters. Because your father reminded me of the construction workers who gave my mother rides home from her night shift when she couldn't afford cab fare." Selina's voice grew stronger with each word. "Because I know what it's like to need help and be too proud to ask for it." Margaret's carefully constructed composure crumbled entirely. We never knew. I thought." "You thought exactly what you wanted to think. It was easier than getting to know me." The office door burst open, and David rushed in, his face flushed from running. "Margaret called me," he said, his eyes moving between the two women. "She said it was urgent, that you two were—" He stopped, taking in Margaret's tear-streaked face and Selina's rigid posture. "What's going on?" Margaret looked at her brother, then at Selina, her mouth opening and closing as if she couldn't find the words. Finally, she managed, "She's been helping us. All of us. 4 years." David's brow furrowed in confusion. "Helping how?" It was Selina who answered, her voice quiet but clear. "Every time your family faced financial trouble, I was there. Your father's company, your uncle's restaurants, your non-profit. I made sure the bills got paid, the grants got approved, the problems disappeared." The silence that followed was deafening. David sank into a chair, his face cycling through the same emotions his sister had displayed moments before. "You never told me," he said finally. "Would it have mattered? Would you have loved me more? Or would you have felt obligated, like you owed me something?" Selina stood, her decision crystallizing with each word. "I didn't want your gratitude, David. I wanted your family's acceptance. But I see now that was never going to happen. Not on my terms, anyway." She moved toward the door, then paused, looking back at both siblings. "I've spent months trying to prove I'm not what you feared I was. But maybe it's time I stopped trying to be what you needed me to be and started remembering who I actually am." As she walked out of the office, leaving David and Margaret in stunned silence behind her, Selina felt something shift inside her chest. For the first time in months, she could breathe fully. But the real revelation was yet to come. The days following the confrontation at Margaret's office unfolded like a slow-motion avalanche. David called 17 times in the first 24 hours. Selina answered none of them. Instead, she found herself doing something she hadn't done in years, taking long walks through the city neighborhoods where she'd grown up. The gentrification was obvious now. Coffee shops and boutiques where corner stores and laundromats used to be, but the bones of her childhood were still there. The fire escape where she'd done homework by streetlight. The church where her mother had taken her every Sunday, rain or shine. It was on one of these walks that she encountered Mrs. Chen, her mother's former landlord, now in her 80s but still sharp as a tack. "Selina? My goodness, look at you." Mrs. Chen's face lit up with genuine warmth. "Your mama would be so proud. I see your name in the papers sometimes. All those important business deals." "Thank you, Mrs. Chen. How have you been?" Getting by. Though I have to say, business has been tough lately. These young developers keep offering to buy my buildings, but they want to turn them into expensive condos. Where would my tenants go?" Selina's attention sharpened. She knew exactly which developers Mrs. Chen was talking about. She'd been tracking their aggressive expansion through this neighborhood for months. What she hadn't expected was the personal connection. "Has anyone offered to help you fight them?" Mrs. Chen laughed, but it held no humor. Who's going to help an old Chinese woman keep her buildings? My lawyer says I don't have much choice. They're offering fair market value, and I can't afford to maintain the properties much longer anyway. That evening, Selina sat in her home office, surrounded by legal documents and financial reports. She'd been researching the development company for hours, and what she'd found made her blood run cold. Hale and Associates, David's family firm, was representing the developers. Her phone buzzed with another call from David. This time, she answered. Selina, thank God. We need to talk. Yes, we do. Her voice was colder than she intended, but the betrayal was too fresh. Tell me about the Riverside Development Project. The silence on the other end of the line was telling. How do you know about? Your family's firm is representing developers who are forcing low-income families out of their homes. The same neighborhood where I grew up, David. The same buildings where my mother worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat. Selina, it's not what you think. It's just business. We're not. Just business. The words came out sharper than she'd intended. Displacing families is just business? Margaret handles those cases, not me. I focus on the non-profit work. How convenient. You get to keep your hands clean while your sister profits from gentrification. Selina stood up, pacing to her window where the city lights blurred together. Do you have any idea what it's like to watch your childhood disappear so that wealthy people can have artisanal coffee shops? That's not fair. You don't understand the complexities. Don't I? Selina's voice rose. I understand better than you think. I understand that while I've been anonymously protecting your family from financial ruin, your family has been profiting from the destruction of mine. The conversation devolved from there, years of unspoken tensions finally finding their voice. David tried to explain, to justify, to minimize. Selina found herself retreating into the armor she'd worn in boardrooms, her emotions locked away behind professional coldness. They hung up without resolution, the silence in her apartment more deafening than their argument had been. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Selina's assistant announced that Margaret Hale was in the lobby, asking to see her. Send her up, Selina said, curiosity overriding her anger. Margaret looked different, less polished, more human. Her usual perfect composure was replaced by something that looked like genuine humility. I came to apologize, Margaret said without preamble once they were seated in Selina's office. And to explain. I'm listening. The Riverside Project. We took it on before we knew about your connection to David. It was just another case, another client. But after yesterday, after learning what you've done for our family. Margaret's voice trailed off. I stayed up all night reading about that neighborhood, about the families we're helping to displace. Selina waited, saying nothing. There's something else you should know, Margaret continued, about why I was so suspicious of you from the beginning. The college girlfriend story? That was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. Margaret's hands twisted in her lap. Our family wasn't always wealthy, Selina. My grandfather lost everything in the recession of the 80s. We had to rebuild from nothing. I remember the shame of it, the way people looked at us differently when we couldn't afford the same things anymore. This was not what Selina had expected to hear. When our father finally got the construction company back on its feet, when we regained our social standing, I swore I'd never let anyone take that from us again. And when David started dating someone so successful, so powerful, Margaret's voice broke slightly. I was terrified. Not that you were a gold digger, but that you'd eventually realize David couldn't match your world and leave him broken. The admission hung in the air between them, recontextualizing months of interactions. So you decided to drive me away first, Selina said quietly. I thought I was protecting him. I thought I was protecting our family. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. I never imagined that you were the one protecting us. Before Selina could respond, her assistant's voice came through the intercom. Ms. Ward? There's someone here to see you. He says it's urgent. David appeared in her doorway, his hair disheveled, his eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion. Don't sign it, he said without greeting. Sign what? Whatever Margaret is here to offer you. Whatever deal she's trying to make to fix this mess. He looked between the two women, his expression desperate. I know about the Riverside project now. I know why you're angry, and you have every right to be. But please don't let my family's mistakes destroy what we have. Margaret stood up slowly. I should go. You two need to talk. As she moved toward the door, she paused next to Selina's chair. For what it's worth, I understand now why David loves you. And I'm sorry it took me so long to see it. After Margaret left, David and Selina sat in silence for a long moment. The weight of revelations and accusations hung between them like a chasm neither knew how to cross. I've been thinking about my mother a lot lately, Selina said finally. About the advice she used to give me. What would she say about all this? Selina smiled sadly. She'd probably say that love without understanding is just another form of selfishness. And that sometimes the people who claim to love you most are the ones who see you least clearly. David's face crumpled. Is that what I've been doing? Loving you selfishly? I don't know, David. You tell me. When someone you love stays silent in the face of injustice, does their love mean less? How do you balance protecting your heart with fighting for what's right? Share your thoughts with us. The conversation with David stretched into the evening, circling through accusations, explanations, and painful truths neither of them wanted to face. As the city lights began to twinkle outside her office windows, Selina felt the weight of exhaustion settling into her bones. I need some air, she said finally, standing up from her desk. Walk with me. They made their way to the building's rooftop garden, a sanctuary Selina had created for moments when the walls of success felt too confining. The December air was sharp and clean, carrying the distant sounds of traffic far below. When I was 12, Selina said, wrapping her coat tighter around herself, my mother got sick. Nothing serious, just the flu, but she couldn't afford to take time off work. So she kept going to her job at the restaurant, serving food while she was barely able to stand. David listened silently, his breath visible in small clouds. One night, she collapsed in the kitchen. The owner fired her on the spot, said she was a liability. We had no money, no insurance, no safety net. Selina's voice was steady, but David could hear the old pain underneath. I remember sitting in our tiny apartment, watching her try to figure out how we'd pay rent, how we'd eat. And I made myself a promise that night. What kind of promise? That I would never be powerless again. That I would build something so strong, so unshakable, that no one could ever make me feel small or disposable or desperate. She turned to face him. Every dollar I've made, every deal I've closed, every building that bears my name, it all goes back to that 12-year-old girl who swore she'd never watch her mother cry over bills again. David reached for her hand, but she stepped away, not ready for his comfort. The thing is, Selina continued, somewhere along the way, I forgot that power without purpose is just another form of emptiness. I got so focused on never being vulnerable that I forgot what I was trying to protect. And what was that? The ability to help people the way I wished someone had helped us. Her voice cracked slightly. Your family's projects, the anonymous donations, supporting your nonprofit, it wasn't just about loving you, David. It was about being the person I needed when I was young and scared and alone. The revelation hung between them, shifting everything David thought he understood about her motivations. But then your family started seeing me as the exact thing I'd spent my life fighting against, Selina said. A person who takes advantage of others, who uses people for personal gain. The irony was so painful I could barely breathe some days. David's face was a canvas of emotions, guilt, understanding, love, and something that looked like awe. Why didn't you tell me? About your childhood, about what drove you? Because I was afraid you'd see me differently. Afraid you'd pity the poor girl instead of loving the strong woman. Selina laughed, but it held no humor. Turns out, keeping secrets doesn't protect you from being misunderstood, it just makes the misunderstanding worse. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the weight of honesty settling around them like snow. There's something I need to tell you, David said finally. his voice carrying a tremor she'd never heard before. "About why I've been so afraid to stand up to my family." Selina waited, sensing that whatever came next would change everything. "When I was 16, I told my parents I wanted to work with underprivileged communities instead of joining the family firm. My father, he didn't take it well. Said I was being naive, that I'd never amount to anything if I didn't learn to think strategically about relationships." David's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "He made me choose, join the family business or lose their support entirely. Financial support, emotional support, everything. And His voice broke. "I chose them. I spent 2 years working at the firm, hating every minute, before I finally found the courage to leave." "David." "But the damage was done. I learned to keep the peace instead of standing up for what I believed in. I learned to compromise my values to maintain relationships." He looked at her directly, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "When my family started treating you badly, I fell back into those same patterns. I told myself I was being diplomatic, that I could change their minds gradually. But the truth is, I was just being a coward." The confession hit Selina like a physical blow. All this time, she'd thought his silence came from agreement or indifference. She'd never considered that it came from his own wounds, his own fears of abandonment. "There's more," David said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The Riverside Development Project? I knew about it months ago. Margaret asked me to review some of the legal documents because they involved non-profit housing laws. I saw the neighborhood names, knew it was where you grew up, but He stopped, unable to continue. "But you said nothing," Selina finished for him. "I told myself it wasn't my case, that it wasn't my responsibility. But the truth is, I was afraid. Afraid that if I opposed my family's business decisions, they'd cut me out again. And afraid that if you knew, you'd see me as complicit in something that hurt people you cared about." Selina felt the last piece of the puzzle click into place. The man she loved, this gentle idealistic man who ran a non-profit and spoke passionately about social justice, had been paralyzed by the same fear that had driven her to build walls around her heart. They'd both been protecting themselves in ways that ultimately hurt the people they cared about most. "So here we are," she said softly. "Two people who've spent so much energy protecting ourselves from being hurt that we forgot how to protect each other." David nodded, tears finally spilling over. "I'm so sorry, Selina. For my silence, for my family's cruelty, for not being the partner you deserved. You've been carrying this burden alone, and I should have been helping you carry it." She studied his face in the soft light from the garden's lanterns, seeing not just the man she'd fallen in love with, but the scared teenager who'd learned that speaking up could cost him everything. Understanding didn't erase the hurt, but it recontextualized it, made it something they might be able to heal together. "The question is," Selina said finally, "what do we do now? How do we move forward when we've both been living with so much fear and so many secrets?" David stepped closer, and this time she didn't move away. "We start by being honest. About everything. About our fears, our mistakes, our hopes. And then we decide if we're brave enough to build something better together." As they stood there on the rooftop, 43 floors above the city that had shaped them both, Selina felt something shift inside her chest. Not the armor of self-protection she'd worn for so long, but something softer and stronger at the same time. The courage to be vulnerable with someone who had proven himself worthy of that trust. But even as hope began to bloom between them, neither of them knew that the biggest challenge to their relationship was yet to come. 3 weeks later, just as Selina began to believe they might actually build something beautiful from the ruins of their secrets, the world exploded around them. She was in her office, reviewing contracts for a new community development project, one that would create affordable housing instead of destroying it, when her assistant buzzed in with panic in her voice. "Ms. Ward? There are reporters downstairs. A lot of them." Before Selina could respond, her phone started ringing. Then her other line. Then her personal cell. The cacophony of sound filled her office as she stared at the news alert that had just popped up on her computer screen. Billionaire's secret. Ward Industries CEO exposed in anonymous donor scandal. Her hands trembled as she clicked the article. Someone had leaked everything, Bank records, legal documents, emails between her financial advisors. Every anonymous donation, every quiet bailout, every secret act of support for the Hale family was laid out in excruciating detail. But that wasn't the worst part. The article painted her generosity as manipulation, her love as calculation. Headlines across multiple outlets read like character assassination, the gold digger's long game, how a billionaire bought a family's silence, anonymous donor or master manipulator. Her phone rang again. David's name on the screen. "Selina, are you seeing this?" "Kind of hard to miss," she said, her voice hollow. "Do you know who?" "It wasn't me," he said quickly. "I swear on my mother's grave, it wasn't me." "But Selina." His voice broke. "My family is in crisis mode. Margaret's phone hasn't stopped ringing. My father's construction company is being investigated for accepting what the press is calling suspicious donations. My nonprofits board is demanding a full audit." Selina closed her eyes, the full scope of the disaster becoming clear. In trying to protect the people she loved, she'd inadvertently put them in a spotlight that could destroy them. "I have to go," she said. "I have to figure out how to fix this." "Selina, wait." But she'd already hung up, her mind racing through damage control scenarios. She buzzed her assistant. "Get me Marcus on the phone," she said, referring to her crisis management team. "And cancel all my meetings for the week." The next few days passed in a blur of emergency meetings, legal consultations, and sleepless nights. The media frenzy showed no signs of abating. Worse, public opinion was split between those who saw her as a secret philanthropist and those who believed she was a master manipulator who'd been playing a long con. The Hale family was being torn apart by the scrutiny. Margaret's law firm was hemorrhaging clients who didn't want to be associated with the scandal. David's nonprofit lost 3 major donors in a single day. Most devastating of all, David's father had a heart attack from the stress and was hospitalized. It was Margaret who called with that news, her voice raw with exhaustion and something that sounded like guilt. "He's stable," she said without preamble when Selina answered. "But the doctors say the stress was a major factor. David is beside himself. He blames himself for not handling this better." "Where is he now?" "At the hospital." "But Selina." Margaret's voice dropped to a whisper. "He's not taking your calls because he thinks this is all his fault. He thinks if he'd stood up to us from the beginning, none of this would have happened." Selina felt her world tilt. "That's not true. This is my fault. I should have been honest from the start instead of—" "Stop." Margaret's voice was firmer now. "We both know whose fault this really is." The admission hung in the air between them. "You leaked it," Selina said, not a question but a statement. "Not directly. But—" Margaret's voice broke completely. "I told someone. Someone I trusted, someone I thought would keep it confidential. I was angry about the Riverside project, about how we'd treated you, and I needed to talk to someone about the guilt. But they saw a story. I'm so sorry, Selina. I never meant for this to happen. I was trying to process my own feelings about what we'd done to you, and I—" Margaret was crying now, her words barely coherent through the tears. Selina sat in her office, surrounded by the wreckage of her carefully constructed life, and felt something inside her break. Not her strength, that remained intact, but her faith in the possibility that love could overcome the fear and prejudice that seemed to poison everything it touched. "I need you to do something for me," she said finally. "Anything. I need you to tell David that I'm withdrawing the engagement." "Selina, no. He loves you. This will destroy him. Look around, Margaret. Everything is already destroyed." Selina's voice was steady, but Margaret could hear the exhaustion in it. "Your father is in the hospital. Your firm is under investigation. David's life's work is being dismantled. All because I tried to love your family the only way I knew how. That's not fair. None of this is your fault. Isn't it?" Selina laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I created this mess by trying to help people who didn't want my help. I convinced myself that anonymous generosity would somehow earn me acceptance, but all I did was set everyone up for this humiliation. David will never accept this. He'll fight for you. Then you need to make him understand that fighting for me will only make things worse. The media won't stop until they've destroyed everything he cares about. The only way this ends is if I remove myself from the equation." That night, Selina sat in her penthouse, looking out at the city that had both made and broken her. She'd built an empire, amassed wealth beyond imagination, and used that power to try to protect the people she loved. But in the end, her love had become their burden, her protection their prison. She thought about her mother's letters, still sitting in the box in her bedroom closet. All those words of wisdom and strength, and yet her mother had never faced anything like this. The peculiar isolation of having so much power that even your love became suspect. For the first time since the scandal broke, Selina allowed herself to cry. Not for her reputation, which could be rebuilt, or her business, which would survive, but for the dream she'd carried since childhood, the dream of finding a place where she could be loved not despite who she was, but because of it. As dawn broke over the city, Selina made her decision. She would disappear for a while, let the media frenzy die down, let David's family rebuild without the shadow of her involvement. It was the most loving thing she could do, even if it felt like dying. She began drafting her resignation letter from the various boards she served on, her goodbye to the city that had shaped her, her farewell to the man who had taught her to hope for more than survival. But she had no idea that David was, at that very moment, making a decision that would change everything. David Hale had never held a press conference before. Standing behind the podium in the community center where his nonprofit had operated for 5 years, facing a room full of reporters and cameras, he felt his hands shake with a combination of terror and determination. Margaret sat in the front row, her face pale but supportive. His father, discharged from the hospital that morning against doctor's orders, sat beside her with an oxygen tank and a stubborn expression that reminded David exactly where he'd inherited his own streak of defiance. "Thank you all for coming," David began, his voice steadier than he felt. "I've called this press conference to address the recent media coverage surrounding my fiancée, Selina Ward, and my family's relationship with her." The room erupted with shouted questions, but David held up his hand for silence. "For the past week, you've painted a picture of a calculating woman who manipulated my family through anonymous donations. I'm here to tell you that narrative is not only false, it's a disgraceful misrepresentation of one of the most generous souls I've ever known." He could see his phone lighting up with calls in his peripheral vision, probably his crisis management team telling him to stop talking. He ignored it. Selina Ward didn't manipulate us. She saved us. When my father's construction company was facing bankruptcy, when my uncle's restaurants were drowning in tax debt, when my nonprofit was about to lose funding that would have meant laying off people who serve our city's most vulnerable populations, Selina stepped in. Not for recognition, not for leverage, but because that's who she is. David's voice grew stronger with each word, months of silence finally breaking like a dam. "You want to know about manipulation? I'll tell you about manipulation. It's my family assuming that a brilliant, accomplished black woman couldn't possibly love me for who I am instead of what I represent. It's questioning her motives while accepting her generosity. It's me," his voice cracked, "staying silent while the people I claim to love tore apart the woman who had been protecting us all." The room was dead silent now, every camera focused on him, every reporter hanging on his words. Selina Ward has spent years using her success to lift up others, anonymously, without fanfare, without expecting anything in return. She's funded scholarships for kids who grew up like she did, she's kept small businesses afloat during economic downturns, she's been the safety net for families who had nowhere else to turn. And when she fell in love with me, she extended that same generosity to my family. David stepped closer to the microphone, his fear replaced by righteous anger. "But instead of gratitude, we gave her suspicion. Instead of welcome, we gave her judgment. Instead of support, I gave her silence. And now you, all of you, are perpetuating the same cruel assumptions that have followed successful black women for generations." In her penthouse, Selina sat frozen in front of her television, her resignation letter forgotten on her desk. She watched the man she loved transform before her eyes, finally finding his voice in defense of their relationship. "The real scandal," David continued, "isn't that Selina helped us. It's that we made her feel she had to hide her generosity because we couldn't see past our own prejudices. It's that I was too much of a coward to stand up for the woman I love when my family treated her like a threat instead of a blessing." Margaret stood up in the front row, and for a moment, David thought she was going to stop him. Instead, she moved to the second microphone. "My brother is right," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I'm Margaret Hale, and I owe Selina Ward more than I can ever repay, not just for her financial support, but for her grace in the face of my inexcusable behavior." Selina's breath caught as Margaret continued. "I was so afraid of my brother being hurt that I became the person doing the hurting. I questioned Selina's motives, I made assumptions based on stereotypes I should have recognized and challenged, and ultimately, I betrayed her confidence to someone I trusted, which led to this media circus." Margaret's voice broke slightly, but she pressed on. "Selina Ward didn't buy our silence or manipulate our family. She loved my brother enough to support his family even when we didn't deserve it. And I was too blinded by my own prejudices to see the gift we were being given." David returned to the microphone. "So to answer the questions you've all been asking, yes, my fiancée has been generous to my family. Yes, she did it anonymously. And yes, I am more grateful and more in love with her today than I was the day I proposed." He looked directly into the main camera. "Selina, if you're watching this, I need you to know something. I'm not asking for your forgiveness because I don't deserve it. I'm not asking you to come back because I haven't proven I can be the partner you need. But I am promising you, in front of everyone, that I will never be silent again when it comes to defending your honor and your heart." His voice softened. "You taught me that love without courage is just another form of selfishness. You showed me that real strength isn't about protecting yourself. It's about protecting the people who matter. I failed you in that, but I won't fail you again." David stepped back from the microphone, then leaned forward again. "And to everyone else, let me be absolutely clear. Selina Ward is not withdrawing from public life because she's guilty of anything. She's withdrawing because people like you have made her life unbearable for loving someone like me. If you want a story, that's your story. A brilliant woman driven into hiding because this society still can't accept that she might be exactly who she appears to be." As the press conference ended and reporters shouted questions, David felt something shift inside his chest. For the first time in his adult life, he had chosen courage over comfort, truth over diplomacy. But the real test would come in the hours that followed. At her penthouse, Selina sat with tears streaming down her face, not from sadness but from something she hadn't felt in weeks: hope. David hadn't just defended her, he had grown before her eyes into the man she'd always believed he could be. Her phone rang. David's name on the screen. "For the first time in days," she answered. "Did you mean it?" she asked without greeting. "Every word." His voice was rough with emotion. "Selina, I know I don't deserve another chance, but where are you right now?" "Outside your building. I've been here since the press conference ended, hoping you'd call." Selina looked out her window and saw him standing on the sidewalk, still in his suit from the conference, looking up at her building like a man who had finally found his courage. "Come up," she said simply. As she waited for the elevator to bring him to her, Selina thought about her mother's letters, about the wisdom that had carried her through the darkest moments of her life. Sometimes, her mother had written, "The most courageous thing you can do is give someone a second chance to love you better." The elevator doors opened, and David stepped into her penthouse, his eyes red-rimmed but clear, his posture straightened by the weight of finally speaking his truth. They stood there for a moment, taking each other in, two people who had been broken down by fear and built back up by love. "I'm scared," Selina said honestly. "So am I," David replied. "But I'm more scared of losing you than I am of fighting for us." The reunion in Selina's penthouse was tender but tentative, like two people learning to trust again after being wounded. They talked through the night, not the careful diplomatic conversations they'd had before, but raw, honest exchanges about their fears, their failures, and their hopes for what they might build together. But the real test of their renewed commitment came 3 days later, when Selina received an unexpected visitor. "There's a Mrs. Chen here to see you," her assistant announced. "She says it's about the Riverside Development Project." Selina's blood ran cold. In all the chaos of the media storm, She'd lost track of the gentrification battle that had originally driven the wedge between her and David's family. Mrs. Chen entered her office looking older than her 80 years, her face etched with worry and exhaustion. "Selina, dear, I'm sorry to bother you during all this trouble, but they've given us 30 days. The developers, they're moving forward with the evictions. My tenants, they have nowhere to go." Selina felt the familiar fire ignite in her chest, the same burning determination that had carried her from poverty to power. "Mrs. Chen, what if I told you there was a way to stop this? Not just delay it, but stop it completely." Hope flickered in the older woman's eyes. "How?" "By buying the entire development project and turning it into something better." Selina's mind was already racing through the possibilities. Community-owned housing, small business spaces, maybe even a community center like the one where David works. But the cost, and after all this publicity, can you afford to take on something so controversial? Selina smiled, the first genuine smile she'd felt in weeks. "Mrs. Chen, I didn't build this company to hide from controversy. I built it to have the power to do what's right, even when it's difficult." Within hours, Selina had assembled her legal team and begun the complex process of outbidding the developers for the entire Riverside district. But she knew she couldn't do it alone, not if she wanted this to be more than just another rich person's gesture. She called David first. "I need your help," she said without preamble. "Anything. I'm going to try to save the Riverside neighborhood, but I need someone who understands community development to help me do it right. Someone who knows how to build projects that actually serve the people who live there." "Selina." David's voice was filled with wonder. "Are you sure? After everything you've been through, taking on another public fight?" "I'm sure. But David, this can't be about me rescuing everyone. It has to be about us building something together, as partners. I need your expertise, your connections in the community, your understanding of what these families actually need." The second call was harder. Margaret answered on the first ring. "I have a proposition for you," Selina said. "I'm listening." "Your firm represented the developers on the Riverside project. I want you to represent the community instead. Help me structure this development so that the current residents don't just stay, they become owners, stakeholders in their own neighborhood." The silence on the other end stretched long enough that Selina wondered if the call had dropped. "You're asking me to essentially undo the work we did for our client," Margaret said finally. "I'm asking you to do better work for people who need it more." Another pause, then. "What would you need from us?" "Legal expertise, community outreach, and a public commitment that Hale and Associates is changing the way it approaches development projects. I'm not just trying to save one neighborhood, Margaret. I'm trying to prove that there's a different way to do business, one that builds people up instead of pushing them out. And if I say yes, if we take this on, then we announce it together. You, me, David, standing together and showing the world what it looks like when people choose to do better instead of just talking about it." The press conference they held a week later was different from David's passionate defense. This time, they stood together on the steps of the community center in the Riverside neighborhood, surrounded by residents who had been facing eviction just days before. Selina stepped to the microphone first, her voice clear and strong. "A week ago, I was ready to disappear from public life because I believed that my involvement in anything only brought controversy and pain to the people I cared about. But I realized something important. Hiding from problems doesn't solve them. It just leaves other people to face them alone." She gestured to the crowd behind her. "These families shouldn't have to choose between affordable housing and safe, well-maintained neighborhoods. Small business owners shouldn't have to choose between serving their community and making a sustainable living. And young people shouldn't have to leave the neighborhoods that raised them just to find opportunities." David stepped forward. "That's why we're announcing the Riverside Community Ownership Initiative. Instead of displacing current residents, we're going to work with them to create community-owned housing, support local businesses, and build the kind of neighborhood development that strengthens communities instead of destroying them." Margaret took her turn at the microphone. "As the lead attorney on this project, I want to be clear about something. This initiative isn't charity. It's justice. For too long, law firms like mine have prioritized profit over people, development over community. That changes today. But it was Mrs. Chen who delivered the moment that would be replayed on news channels for weeks. When asked by a reporter why she trusted these three people to follow through on their promises, she stepped to the microphone with surprising confidence. You ask why I trust them? Because they didn't just talk about helping, they listened. They came to our community meetings, they sat in our kitchens, they learned our names and our stories. And when they had the power to make things better, they chose to use it. She looked directly at Selina. This young woman could have bought our buildings and done whatever she wanted with them. Instead, she asked us what we wanted. That's not manipulation, that's respect. The questions from reporters were pointed, some skeptical, but Selina found herself answering with a confidence she hadn't felt in months. When one particularly aggressive journalist suggested this was all just an elaborate PR stunt to rehabilitate her image, David stepped in before she could respond. Let me ask you something, he said, his voice carrying the authority he'd found during his previous press conference. When was the last time you saw a billionaire invite community oversight of their investments? When was the last time you saw a development project where the current residents become equity holders instead of displaced persons? He gestured to the legal documents Margaret held. This isn't PR. These are binding contracts that give this community real power over their own future. If that's a stunt, then I hope more people start pulling stunts like this. As the press conference ended and reporters dispersed, Selina found herself standing in the same spot where her mother used to wait for the bus after her night shifts. But now, instead of feeling small in the shadow of development and displacement, she felt rooted, connected to the past that had shaped her and the future she was helping to create. David joined her, slipping his hand into hers. So, he said softly, how does it feel to save your childhood neighborhood? Like coming home, she replied, but then corrected herself. No, like building a home. For all of us. As the sun set over the city, painting the sky in shades of gold and possibility, Selina realized that the greatest victory wasn't in the project they'd announced or the media attention they'd garnered. It was in the way David had stood beside her as an equal partner, the way Margaret had chosen justice over profit, and the way Mrs. Chen had looked at her with respect rather than suspicion. They had faced their biggest challenge not by hiding from it, but by transforming it into something that served others. When you have the power to make a difference, what stops you from using it? How do you move from talking about change to actually creating it? Share your thoughts in the comments.